beyond the pale halo of Saturn's rings, where sunlight thins to a cold whisper. The Zerathian fleet came to a stop so perfect it seemed printed onto space. 30 vessels, cathedral-tall spines sheathed in living metal locked into a silent lattice. The hulls drank starlight until they became sketches against black, then released it as a ripple of status lights that ran like nervous thought along their seams. On the flagship Dominion's claw, the command spine hummed with the agreeable pressure of acceleration fields. Commander Vrex stood before the ship's mindwall, a wide slab that could be window, map, or courtroom depending on who needed convincing. Today it was Earth, a marble with blue oceans veined by cloud, its night side stippled by human circuitry. They cluster their lights in swarms. Observed strategist Reen, her Carapace plates IRizing to bleed off heat. Urban density implies supply chains. Break chains, break will. Confidence is not a plan, Vrex said. His voice carried the even timbre of someone who'd watched too many plans end in red numbers. He made a short gesture and the mindwall segmented, each pane filling with intercepted broadcast prey song. Earth's signals arrived as a chaotic braid. Sports roars, weather alerts. What passed for their theater, and a frequency-hopping jungle of commerce. The fleet's translators pulverized it into meaning. One pane showed a courtroom drama where a human pounded a table and shouted about justice. Another showed a documentary, a woman in a bright parka tagging a tranquilized wolf, her breath fogging the lens. A third showed a man in a kitchen demonstrating 15 ways to cook an egg. Gesturing with a pan as if delivering a sermon, Rin tilted her narrow head. They elevate trivialities into ritual. That is a ritual, Vrex said. Ritual builds coherence. Coherence builds resistance. Your caution is noted, Commander, Admiral Keth replied from her days, her crest etched with the silver trace of 10 victorious campaigns. But we have not crossed the interstice to draft sociological essays. Humanity is pre-FTL, physical constrained, and heavily myth-bound. They rate a 0.67 on the Kardashev progression. Planetary suppression is a 4-day operation. The Dominion's claw will lead orbital pacification. We will be done before the rings complete a fifth of a degree. Vrex kept his crest flat. I propose a reconnaissance window. Their signal noise is inconsistent with the predicted compliance curve. There is something. Offer a murmur ran through the council pit officers anchored in their gimbaled cradles. The air humming with machine attention. On the mindwall, yet another human spectacle unfolded. A stadium full of people screaming as to fighters traded. Blows inside a cage. The translators tagged it, sanctioned combat. The algorithm annotated, recreational violence, socially bonded. Rin's plates clicked. They ritualize conflict, then laugh about it over fermented bread juice, inefficient. Vrex remembered Tethra 9, how the inefficient had lashed themselves to their grain mills, and sung until the plasma fire took them. There were numbers, and then there were the spaces numbers couldn't map. We should still look, he said. Admiral Keth's crest twitched, a concession measured in microns. Very well. To rotation cycles. Quiet. No transgressions of their orbital nets. No contact. Orders spilled. Scout Doctrine 7 ghost entry. Conformal profiles. Zero trace egress. Across the fleet, bay doors unsealed like pupils, and reconnaissance spindles folded out on gossamer veins. Each probe was a moth with a mathematician's heart. Ceramic bones. Event skin that slid radar off like rain. Gravitic whiskers tasting the curl of nearby mass. Release, Vrex said. And 1,000 specks left their mothers. They fell past the rings past. Ruins of ice and rock that rang against each other in slow. Collisions dived through the magnetosphere that snarled at them like a vast blue animal and ghosted into the quilt of atmosphere. Their event skin took on the temperature of the sky. They became a rumor. One probe skimmed the warm breath of a sprawling desert city, ear to the ground for the percussion of engines. Another threaded cloud above an ocean where the waves marched in neat ranks, until weather decided to spoil the formation. A third drifted down a canyon of glass towers, catching human faces reflected 100 times same faces, different angles, their expressions splintering into the city's mosaics. Sampling wide, reported the probe choir. A composite voice spun from 100 thin throats. The mindwall partitioned again, shingled now with telemetry. G-forces of airborne metal tubes carrying humans for money. Lung gas compositions in sealed rooms where they studied rocks with names like Holocene. Heartbeat graphs from stadiums when the home group almost scored. Thermal maps of factories where robotic arms welded car skeletons while music shook the walls. In the shadow of the wall, a news broadcast stuttered in, a leader assuring the timid that there was no cause for alarm. A different leader promising alarm would be delivered on schedule if the timid did not comply. A scientist, flanked by cartons of models, explaining probabilities with her hands. Beneath those hands, a crawl of text begged viewers to try a new toothpaste. Rin flicked a claw along a chart. We plug their orbital communications in 8 minutes. We sever grids in another 11. From there, stage dread. Make it loud. Offer safety to those who kneel. Those who kneel will be many, Keth said. There may be towns who do not receive the offer because they do not make themselves known. That is tolerable. Vrex watched a child on one feed stand at the edge of a skating pond, arms out, struggling between gravity and the slick skin of the world. The child fell, laughed, and tried again. We will find them, he said evenly. All of them. Or we will find enough to call it a map. He sealed off a slice of Mindwall for himself and called up human behavioral synthesis. The fleet's machine mind obliged, a swirl of probabilities and trait clusters. Humans, the model said, cohere under stress but fracture along lines invisible until tugged. They store history in objects with no function except memory. They fear silence, fill it with noise, and later call that noise art. Their violence is often prefaced by apology and followed by gift-giving. They engineer tools to do work, then mythologize themselves as the work's masters. They laugh before danger and sometimes during. He pinched out the summary. It collapsed into a single number that pretended to be confidence. Your reluctance reads as superstition, Keth said without heat. They had served together long enough to skip the dance and go straight to the bruise. You saw something once, and now you see it everywhere. I saw odds, Vrex said. Then I saw the coin land on its edge. Keth's crest flattened in appreciation. Then let us blow on the table, if only to watch the coin fall. He inclined his head. 2 cycles. I'll return with a plan even your ghosts will approve. Your humor is improving, Rin said dryly. Shall I log it as a portent? The fleet poured itself into its vigil. The Dominion's claw unfurled collectors that drank the faint spill of Saturn's charged particles, topped its stores, and stitched itself to the quiet. On the lower decks where the ship kept things, it did not entirely understand about its own making choral engines sang a note so low. It was more weather than sound. Night and day tumbled over Earth like dice. The probes seeped into places even humans thought unreachable. One slid beneath the asphalt skin of a highway to feel trucks thunder overhead. Another curled in the rafters of a gym where a boxing coach barked impossible instructions, and a student did them anyway. A third drifted above a hospital ward at 3 a.m., counting the steady beep of machines that argued with death in elaborate syllogisms. They watched a protest where voices braided into a single rope thick enough to pull a statue from its plinth. They watched a funeral where men pretended not to cry and failed in ways that made them magnificent. They watched a launch site where a smaller human machine rode fire into the dark, not to conquer, only to look. Cataloging anomalies, the probe choir reported. High variance between projected and observed risk appetite. Outlier clusters, endurance sports, volunteer disaster response, unpaid art. Rin made notes with her hind hand while her forehands orchestrated pressure maps of the continents. Outliers do not govern fleets. No, Vrex said, although he was watching a feed of a small fishing boat punching into weather. They had no right to fight, but they write the footnotes. Most readers only remember the footnotes. He let his crest droop for the length of a breath. Begin regional drills. I want to know the bones under their skin. Floodplain analysis. Grain roots. Medicine stockpiles. Turn their maps against them. Already there, Rin said, satisfaction brightening her plates. Fields pulsed on the Mindwall. The neat rectangles of agriculture. The messy halos of suburbs. The arteries of freight. Their oceans are both a moat and a trap. We can choke them quietly. Kef listened, eyes hooded. Good, and the vector for first contact. None, Vrex said. We do not scare them yet. Not until we know what kind of scared they become. The probes pushed farther north, lured by the elegant boredom of wilderness. Snowfields unrolled like unwritten pages. Mountains shouldered the sky. The thermal maps simplified. Fewer engines, more animals. The choir muted its own whisper. Even machines recognized the etiquette of quiet places. One spindle dropped into the vast throat of the Alaskan interior. An old cold that took light and kept it. It noted the signature of a human alone, small heat in a white bowl and the larger, roving heat of something else. It watched the two dots converge through veils of snow. Flagging intersect, the choir said, almost apologetic. Non-municipal, non-infrastructure, low objective value. Vrex, who had been skimming coastal energy grids, flicked attention at the note. A tiny frame opened on the Mindwall, trees like black needles, wind combing a pale plain. A human shape moving in a line that looked both purposeful and tired. A second signature ghosted the edge, a roving ellipsis of heat and muscle. Log it, Rin said without looking. We have ports to hold, Vrex said. The frame enlarged until it shouldered lesser feeds aside. On the ice, the human stopped and turned. The moving heat at the edge of the frame changed shape, unrolled like a sentence getting to its verb. Vrex said nothing. He didn't have a number yet. He didn't even know what he was waiting to see. But the coin, somewhere in him, had started to quiver. Commander, Keth prompted, patience and irritation braided into something that sounded like respect. Let it play, Vrex said softly. Far below the rings and the arguments and the comfortable mathematics of conquest, the forest held its breath. The probe adjusted focus. Snow hissed. The human dropped something metallic that thumped once into the white. On the Mindwall, the fleet watched a dot of heat face a larger one, and for the first time since arriving in the system, nothing else in the room mattered. The Alaskan interior in late winter was a wilderness written in silence and snow. The forest rose in columns of spruce and pine, their trunks black against the white. Wind moved through the branches like a whisper to ancient for translation. To most eyes it was emptiness. To Jack Thornton, it was home. Jack was the kind of man people in town called born 100 years too late. He had no patience for smartphones, banks, or crowds. He preferred axes over credit cards, whiskey over small talk, and the solitude of wilderness over the hum of city lights. He wasn't old, not yet 40 and hard as the frozen ground beneath his boots, but he bore the wear of a life, lived at the edge. A scar split his eyebrow. His nose was crooked, once broken in a logging accident. His hands were maps of calluses. That morning, his luck had already soured. His rifle, an old Winchester that had served him faithfully for years, was empty. The single buck he'd tracked had slipped away after hours of patient stalking. Now he carried only the Winchester's weight, useless but familiar, and a hunting knife strapped to his hip. Snow crunched beneath him as he trudged through the trees, breath clouding in front of his beard. Above, the sky glowed with the flat gray of an oncoming storm. Jack muttered curses at himself, at the deer, at the indifferent weather. He wasn't alone. The grizzly had been shadowing him for half a mile. At first it had been just a noise, branches snapping where the wind couldn't reach. The faint rumble of something large moving parallel. Jack knew that sound. Predators moved with intent. A bear this time of year, lean from hibernation, would be hungry enough to gamble on a human. When it finally emerged from the tree line, Jack felt the hair on his neck rise. The beast was massive, close to 800 pounds, shoulders high as his chest, fur dark and wet with melted snow. Its jaws opened in a growl that vibrated the air like distant thunder. Ah, hell, Jack muttered. He had no bullets, no time. Just himself, his knife, and the nearest fallen branch thick enough to swing. The Zerathian probe hovered high above, a faint shimmer against the clouds. Its sensors locked onto the encounter, dissecting heat signatures, heart rates, muscle tension. The fleet expected predictable data, a human fleeing, screaming, becoming prey. But the probe flagged anomaly after anomaly. Jack did not run. Instead, he squared his shoulders, dropped the rifle, and roared back at the bear, a sound ripped straight from his lungs. Primal and furious, echoing through the trees. The bear blinked, momentarily confused, then surged forward in a blur of claws and muscle. Jack snatched up the branch. It was nearly 6 feet long, thick at one end, sharpened by chance at the other. He drove it forward like a spear as the bear lunged. The point struck the animal's shoulder, staggering it, but not stopping it. The branch cracked, splinters flying. The two collided in a spray of snow. The bear's claws raked Jack's coat, tearing fabric, grazing flesh. Jack bellowed and slammed his fist into the bear's snout. A desperate strike that snapped the animal's head sideways. He went down beneath its weight, rolling in the snow, knife flashing free from its sheath. The probe recorded each frantic heartbeat, each impossible surge of strength. Its logic tree twisted into contradiction. This human should be dead. Instead, he fought with a ferocity no simulation had predicted. Jack drove the knife into the bear's side. Once, twice, the beast roared, thrashing, lifting him like a doll with one sweep of its paw. Pain lanced through his ribs, but Jack didn't let go. He clung to its thick fur, plunging the blade again and again until blood soaked both of them. At last, the bear stumbled. It tried to rise, then collapsed in the snow, steam rising from its body. Jack staggered back, chest heaving, clothes torn and painted with blood that was half his, half the bear's. He stared down at the beast for a long moment, then raised his arms to the gray sky and shouted not words, just sound, a raw challenge hurled into the universe itself. His voice carried through the trees, fierce enough to make crows take flight. Above, the probe transmitted everything on the Dominion's claw. The command deck fell silent as the feed played across the Mindwall. Officers watched, their crests flattened, their plates humming with unease. No one spoke. For the first time, they had seen a human not as prey, not as a fragile animal, but as something else entirely, and down on Earth. Jack Thornton dragged the bear's carcass behind him, half limping, half marching, every step leaving red in the snow. He muttered to himself, voice hoarse but proud, "Damn bear picked the wrong day." The storm broke overhead, and the wilderness swallowed the sound. The command deck of the Dominion's claw had weathered centuries of war councils. Its walls bore the memories of sieges, etched into the living alloy as faint ridges of resonance. Victories were replayed here, studied until they became doctrine, until each conquest was a formula that could be repeated with precision. But now, the walls seemed to lean inward, as if listening. The Mindwall replayed the fight again, its surface a vast, high-definition lens into the Alaskan wilderness. The officers watched the human roar, the bear's charge, the impossible clash of bone and will. They watched the blood. They watched the ending where the human raised his arms, victorious and defiant, as if declaring war not only on the animal, but on the universe itself. The footage looped. A silence deeper than space stretched across the chamber. It wasn't the silence of agreement. It was the silence of doubt. Strategist Rin broke it first. Her voice trembled, though she tried to hide it behind cold analysis. The specimen displayed an extreme deviation from expected prey behavior. Humans, according to all predictive models, should flee from predators exceeding their mass by a factor of 3 or more. This one not only resisted, he pursued victory at lethal risk. Her plates fluttered in agitation. He should not exist. Commander Vrex remained motionless, crest low, eyes fixed on the screen. He didn't blink, didn't speak, just studied. Admiral Kef leaned forward in her daze, her silver-edged crest catching the light. She had commanded fleets that burned worlds and broken empires. She was not easily shaken, yet even her voice carried hesitation. Is this an anomaly, or is this the measure of them? Rin twisted in her cradle, pulling up data overlays. Numbers filled the air, probabilities, cultural notes, battlefield extrapolations. She clung to statistics like a drowning creature clings to driftwood. We have evidence of human irrationality in other contexts: ritualized combat sports, self-endangerment for social status, volunteer response in natural disasters. But this level of suicidal defiance, this should be rare. And yet, Vrex finally said, voice low but steady, we are watching it happen. Not in myth, not in staged ritual. In the wilderness, alone, no audience, no reward. The words dropped into the silence like stones. The probe choir spoke, its many-throated voice unnervingly calm. Additional archival review corroborates elevated risk tolerance. Recorded incidents: lone humans engaging predators with primitive weapons. Survival accounts involving self-mutilation to escape entrapment. Individuals resisting natural forces far beyond their scale. Probability of recurrence higher than previously estimated. The chamber stirred. Officers shifted. Some hissed disbelief. Others exchanged dark looks. One captain raised a claw. But that is madness. They endanger themselves without gain. Vrex turned to him, eyes hard. And madness that wins battles, Captain, is no longer madness. It is a weapon. The words spread like a crack in glass. Admiral Keth narrowed her gaze. Explain. Vrex gestured to the replay, freezing the image on Jack Thornton dragging the bear through the snow. Look, this human fought a creature it should not have defeated. By every calculation, the bear should have won. Yet the human triumphed. Why? Because it did not accept the probability of death. It ignored fear. It ignored reason. It fought with a violence that cannot be predicted by logic. He looked around the chamber. If this is not an anomaly, if this is even a possibility among them, then every battle we fight on Earth is no longer against strategy. It is against chaos, against the willingness to throw themselves into certain death and sometimes survive. Rin hissed softly, her plates clicking. Unpredictability breaks models, breaks war planning. 1,000 humans might fall, but one like this could collapse an entire strategy if it does the impossible. The Admiral's silence was heavy. The Council watched the feat again, slower this time. They watched Jack's eyes as he roared, as he threw himself at the bear. There was no hesitation, no pause for calculation, only commitment. The probe added an annotation. Subject appears to enter heightened state of aggression possible. Neural override of fear response. Duration extended. Outcome lethal victory. One officer muttered what many were thinking. Even our shock troopers would hesitate to engage such a beast without plasma support. This human had a stick, and he won. Vrex finished. The chamber's hum rose. The low vibration of unease spreading through carapaces. Keth finally rose to her full height, towering over the council pit. Her voice carried the weight of command, but also something rare, caution. If this is representative, if even a fraction of their species carries this capacity, then Earth is not prey. Earth is poison, a nest of unstable predators masquerading as prey. Silence again. But this time it was agreement, heavy and grim. Vrex allowed himself the faintest tightening of his crest. We can burn their cities, yes. We can silence their grids. But how many of these anomalies will rise from the ashes? How many will choose to fight barehanded against our machines? We have seen what one can do against a beast of the wild. What will 1,000 do when we land troops? Rin whispered, we would drown in their defiance. The Admiral's crest shifted, a sign of reluctant acknowledgement. She spoke into the stillness. We must reconsider. Invasion may no longer be viable. The Council rippled with unease. Some hissed protests, but they were thin, weak, half-hearted. The footage had shaken them to their cores. On the Mindwall, the human lifted his arms to the sky one final time, bloody and unbowed. The feed froze on that image, a single figure, broken and triumphant, daring the universe to send more. And for the first time in generations, the Zirathian fleet hesitated. The council chamber aboard the Dominion's Claw had not felt this heavy since the Zirathians lost their first fleet to the machine minds of Ygrath Prime. That had been a century ago, and even then there had been confidence that the setback was temporary. Tonight, there was no such confidence. The frozen image of the human arms lifted, soaked in blood, alive when it should have been dead, still glared from the Mindwall like a god daring mortals to trespass. Admiral Keth broke the silence, her crest tilted low, silver edges catching the faint glow of the chamber lights. We came to conquer, to enslave, to strip their oceans and their metals and leave the husk behind. But what we have seen suggests a paradox. Humanity is weaker than us in every measurable sense, yet they are stronger. Where strength should not exist, strategist Rin tapped her claws against her cradle, nervous, a sound like rain on metal. We cannot program for this kind of madness. It is not bravery, not exactly. It is an indifference to death, an irrationality so complete it becomes effective. Another captain hissed, frustration sharpened their tone. Are we truly going to abandon conquest because of a single human? A single fight? The probe Choyer's voice cut through, many tones woven into one. Not one. Correlation matrix reveals thousands of similar patterns throughout recorded human history. Survivors of impossible ordeals. Soldiers who fought when wounded beyond recovery. Explorers who marched into voids with no promise of return. Parents shielding offspring against fire, flood, and predator. Documented, mythologized, celebrated. This trait is systemic. Vrex's voice was steady, but there was a chill beneath it. You misunderstand, Captain. It is not one human we fear. It is the possibility that any human might become that one, at any moment. There is no algorithm to predict it, no way to prepare. You can defeat 10,000, but one may stand when none should, and that one changes everything. The chamber stirred again. Claws flexed. Crests quivered. The fleet officers were predators by nature, bred for dominance. Yet every instinct told them that this prey species carried a hidden venom. Admiral Keth made her decision. Her voice rang out like a hammer on iron. Transmit to the fleet. Hold invasion. Initiate withdrawal protocol. Gasps rippled through the pit. To abandon a conquest after such investment fuel, distance, stealth maneuvers was unthinkable. But no one openly challenged her. The image on the wall silenced even ambition. Rin whispered, almost reverent, we call them prey. Yet they wrestle their predators with sticks. What name do we give a species like that? Vrex lowered his eyes. Survivors. And survivors cannot be enslaved. The decision spread across the fleet like a shiver. The great engines of the Zerathian warships awoke in unison, igniting with a thunder that could shatter moons. Saturn's rings reflected their glow in pale ribbons of light. Slowly, reluctantly, the Armada turned its nose to the void, leaving Earth untouched. But before departure, one final record was entered into the Zerathian archives. It was spoken aloud by the probe choir, its words etched into the fleet's living memory for all future generations. The species designating itself human is to be classified as a tier black hazard. Assessment, physiology fragile, but willpower unquantifiable. Capable of acts that contradict survival instinct, probability, and logic. Threat, extreme. Engaging humans in direct conquest risks disproportionate loss. Their irrationality functions as a weapon. They do not submit when cornered. They do not yield when broken. They rise again and again, until victory or death, sometimes both at once. Recommendation, do not provoke. Observe from distance. Study from afar. Record their defiance, but do not test it. Earth is forbidden. The words settled over the fleet like a tombstone. On Earth. Jack Thornton limped into the nearest town, dragging the bear's carcass on a makeshift sled. His coat was shredded, his ribs ached with every breath, and his hands trembled from exhaustion. Yet his eyes burned bright with the fire of survival. The locals at the bar stared when he shoved open the door, snow blowing in behind him. Jack dropped his burden on the threshold with a wet thud, leaned against the counter, and ordered whiskey in a voice ragged but proud. You wouldn't believe the day I've had, he muttered, lifting the glass to his lips dot above him, far beyond the reach of human eyes. The most powerful fleet in the galaxy fled from his planet not because of armies or weapons, but because one stubborn man had refused to die dot, and so humanity remained free. Not because it was the strongest, but because it was the most dangerous kind of species in the universe, the kind that does not know when to quit.